What does a Honda and a sheep have in common? For those of you that are familiar with the internet, you'd probably guess where I'm going with this. I've been a petrol head most of my life, and I'm guilty of growing up thinking that Hondas were nothing more than lawnmowers. Look around on the internet and all you'll see is memes related to Hondas and how they've got no torque. But is this ridicule really deserved? If it were, then the Civic FN2 is probably the most worthy. Released in 2007, the FN2 was met with some pretty poor reviews, failing to be as hot as its predecessor, the Honda Civic Type R EP3. Unable to match its performance and tight chassis, to this day the FN2 still sits in its shadow.
Don't be fooled though, get this thing into VTEC and it's still a hot hatch. I have fond memories of watching Top Gear back in the day, and I do remember Clarkson putting this car against its predecessor, the EP3. And to be quite honest, what was shown meant that the FN2 was made to look like a bit of a slouch. It was made to look like a pretty poor car. And getting behind the wheel now, I think my opinion of this car was kind of misinformed by that.
Okay, so it's not as fast as the car it replaced, but it isn't exactly slow, especially when compared to the hot hatches that were around at the time. Maximum speed was 146 miles an hour and the 0 to 60 time was 6.6 seconds. This was partly due to the fact that it was heavier than the car it replaced, but overall the driving experience is far more refined. This in turn is somewhat of a downfall for the FN2, it almost feels too refined. And if you're in the market for a hot hatch and you want a raw and exciting experience, this probably isn't the place to be looking.
Of course, 14 years have passed since those press reviews came out, and we've had a lot of time to sort of warm to the FN2. But has that actually happened, and what is it like to drive now? I'll be the first to admit that I've never really been a massive Honda fan. I don't know why. I'm too used to seeing memes online about how they've got no torque and you know, they're lawnmowers. And for some time I think I've held firm with that belief, and it's probably reaffirmed by reviews of the cars like this. But right now, Honda make one of the class leading front wheel drive hot hatches, the FK8, that kind of sets the precedent for the rest of the group to follow. I think it's proven in time that all manufacturers miss the mark occasionally, and maybe the FN2 is that blip on the map for Honda, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad car. Sure, it feels a little bit heavy, I think, is one of the things I noticed at first. It does feel it, and it doesn't feel as agile because of that extra weight in the smaller corners, but it still feels planted. Feedback through the steering is artificial to an extent, but it does feel direct. There's no play in it at all. It's not quite as agile as my Megane, but it's still fairly playful.
Of course, what's the point of a hot hatch if it doesn't go around corners well? And the way the Civic does this is actually really rewarding. The extra weight that it carries, around 150 kilos over its predecessor, is noticed on the tighter, sharper corners, but on the longer, swooping Country B roads it feels poised and balanced. My only criticism is that I'd like it to be that little bit sharper, and I suspect that could probably be remedied by a suspension refresh. It's also worth noting that the FN2 did actually come with a solid rear beam, whereas the EP3 came with independent rear suspension, furthering the idea then that this chassis is far less dynamic than the one that it replaced.
That slightly less complicated and dulled down suspension is noticed, but you do begin to forgive the car when you start winding up that engine. And this is something that I feel I've really missed. I've been led to believe that Hondas are slow and gutless, but they make you work for it, and when you do work, they put a big grin on your face. The car feels pretty docile at lower speeds, and when you're commuting normally, it's you wouldn't really know you're in anything special, but when you do wind this engine up, it really does come alive. And of course, what good is a silky smooth 4-cylinder engine that encourages you to rev it out to the red line without a beautiful direct gearbox to go with it? Now this manual shift just feels incredible to use. It feels 100%, and that is without exaggeration, 100% better than my R26 shift, which is something I need to address, because it just feels so smooth and direct. You know what gear you're going to get every single time. It's not quite as good as the S2000, but it's up there. Now I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that this car is the most exciting hot hatch you can get your hands on right now, because it simply isn't, but it is a balanced compromise between being affordable, fun, and suited to a daily. When you aren't busy revving this thing to the red line, it does actually make for quite a comfortable daily. And the build quality, being a Honda, is sure enough pretty damn good. Inside, it's actually really, really nice. There is quite a bit going on the dashboard, I must say. I've got my speed really far in front of me. I've got a rev counter that I can't really see because of the positioning of the wheel, which could be rectified with a few minor tweaks. And the only other comment I have really on the interior is the rear view visibility out of the back. You can't really see a lot through the rear view mirror, and that's thanks to the spoiler, which blocks most of it in fact. But all is forgiven, because this is at the end of the day quite a leery hot hatch. It did push the envelope quite a bit compared to the previous, almost dull looking in comparison EP3. This FN2 does offer a lot more to look at. It's very triangulated in every sense of the word, from the outside exhaust to the front end to the interior. The theme continues throughout, but you do grow to kind of love that about this car. It's yeah, it's got its charms.
So the FN2 is not perfect, it's far from it, but it depends how you look at it. If you're looking at this as a car that you can daily enjoy and occasionally wind that engine up and get the best out of it, then this is a fantastic car. It's not the quickest, the most fun, the most exciting, and far from the most desired car there is, but it does have character and charm.
Now I've said this a few times on the channel. Naturally aspirated hot hatches are a dying breed and a thing that should be loved and cherished. And who does it better than a manufacturer that builds 4-pot 4-cylinder engines that rev out to 8,000, 9,000 RPM and above? No one other than Honda. I guess to answer the video title, how bad is the worst Civic ever made? If this is the worst Honda has to offer, then I seriously want to drive the best, because this is, yeah, it's a fantastic car. And I think the fact that the FN2 sits in the shadow of the EP3 still to this day means that hot hatch lovers can get themselves a bargain. These often fly under the radar, and sure, for a really clean one you're going to pay a lot of money, but for a car like this, probably sub £4,000, and you get a heck of a lot of car for your money. Sure, it's not the most cherished and loved hot hatches, but you have to ask yourself, does that really matter when you're behind the wheel and you're having fun? Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. A massive thank you to Josh for letting me drive this car. I'm going to review his Integra soon, and if you like Hondas, then you're going to love what he's got, because it is an incredible car. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.